The snow had been accumulating on my roof for 3 days straight when I found the citation taped to my front door, printed on official-looking letterhead with the Mountain Ridge Homeowners Association logo stamped across the top like some kind of government decree. I stood there on my porch in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, staring at the piece of paper that claimed I was in violation of Section 12.4, subsection B of the HOA guidelines, which apparently required all homeowners to remove snow accumulation exceeding 12 inches from their roofs within 48 hours of snowfall cessation. The fine was $250, with an additional $50 per day if I didn't comply within 72 hours. I had never heard of such a ridiculous rule in my entire life, and I had lived in this house for nearly 4 years. My name is Nathan Torres, and I bought this 3-bedroom cabin-style home back in 2022 when I landed my remote software engineering job. The place was perfect for me. Tucked into the mountains with a view of the ski slopes, quiet neighbors, and enough space that I didn't feel cramped working from home. The HOA had always been relatively hands-off, or so I thought. We paid our dues. They maintained the common areas and the entrance gates, and everyone minded their own business. That apparently changed 6 months ago when the HOA board had their annual election, and a woman named Karen Pritchard took over as president. I had met her exactly once at a neighborhood barbecue the previous summer. She was in her late 40s with that distinctive haircut that seemed to be a requirement for people who enjoyed complaining, and she had spent the entire event telling everyone about proper grilling temperatures and why the association needed stricter enforcement of community standards. I crumpled the citation in my hand and looked up at my roof. Sure enough, there was a good 2 feet of snow piled up there, maybe more in some spots. The storm had dumped nearly 3 feet over the past week, and yeah, it was a lot, but my roof was built for this. Every house in the Colorado Rockies dealt with snow loads. That was just part of living at 8,000 feet elevation. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Marcus, who had lived in the community for over a decade. "Hey man, did you get one of these crazy citations about roof snow removal?" I asked when he picked up. "Oh yeah, got mine yesterday," Marcus said with a laugh that sounded more frustrated than amused. "Karen's been on a warpath lately. Apparently she brought in some engineer who claimed that excessive snow on roofs poses a danger to the structural integrity of the neighborhood or some garbage like that. Most of us are just ignoring it. Can she actually fine us for this?" According to the HOA bylaws, the board has pretty broad authority to implement safety regulations. I looked it up, but the thing is, nobody's ever enforced anything like this before. It's insane. Do you know what it costs to hire someone to clear your roof after a storm? We're talking $300 to $500, and that's if you can even find someone available. Everyone's booked solid. I thanked Marcus and hung up, staring at the citation again. $250 for not removing snow that would melt on its own in a few weeks anyway. The weather forecast showed temperatures staying cold for at least another week, maybe longer. Even if I wanted to comply, finding a contractor would be nearly impossible, and I certainly wasn't going to risk my neck climbing up on an icy roof with a shovel. I decided to do what any reasonable person would do. I ignored it. 3 days later, I found another notice on my door. This one informed me that my fine had increased to $350 due to my continued non-compliance, and that if I didn't take action within the next 48 hours, the HOA would hire a contractor at my expense to remove the snow, with additional administrative fees added to my account. That was when I got angry. I had been patient, assuming this was just some overzealous HOA president flexing her newfound authority. But now she was threatening to tack on who knows how much in additional charges to my account. I grabbed my jacket and drove down to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community entrance. The office was warm, almost stifling compared to the cold outside. A young woman sat at the front desk, probably early 20s, looking bored as she scrolled through her phone. When I walked in, she glanced up with a practiced customer service smile. "Hi, I need to speak with Karen Pritchard," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You have an appointment?" "No, but this is urgent. It's regarding these snow removal citations." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, yeah, we've been getting a lot of complaints about those. Let me see if she's available." She disappeared through a door behind her desk, and I waited, reading the various notices posted on the bulletin board. There were announcements about community events, reminders about trash collection schedules, and sure enough, a brand new posting about the snow removal policy, complete with diagrams and measurements. After about 5 minutes, the receptionist returned with Karen Pritchard trailing behind her. Karen wore a burgundy blazer over a cream blouse, her blonde hair styled in that asymmetrical cut that seemed designed to demand speaking with managers. She looked at me with an expression that somehow managed to be both polite and condescending at the same time. "Mr. Torres, isn't it? How can I help you today?" Her voice had that artificial sweetness that immediately put me on edge. "I got your citations about the snow on my roof. I want to know what authority you have to fine residents for something like this." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Mr. Torres, the citations are perfectly within the HOA's authority. Section 12.4, subsection B was added to our guidelines 6 months ago during our annual policy review. All homeowners received notification of the changes." I never received any notification about roof snow removal requirements. "It was in the newsletter, Mr. Torres. We send them out quarterly. Additionally, it's every homeowner's responsibility to stay informed about community guidelines and regulations." I felt my jaw clench. Nobody clears snow off their roofs unless there's a structural concern. My house is built to code. The snow isn't a danger. "That's not for you to determine," Karen said, her tone sharpening slightly. "We brought in a certified structural engineer who assessed the risks and made recommendations." The board voted unanimously to implement these safety measures. "If you don't comply, you'll continue to accrue fines, and we will take action to remedy the situation at your expense." This is ridiculous. You can't just make up rules and start fining people hundreds of dollars. "We're not making up rules, Mr. Torres. We're protecting property values and ensuring the safety of our community. Now, if you'd like to file a formal appeal, you can submit it in writing to the board. We review appeals at our monthly meetings. The next one is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And what happens to the fines in the meantime? They continue to accrue until you comply with the regulations." I wanted to argue more, but I could see it was pointless. Karen had that look that certain people get when they're drunk on a tiny bit of power, the kind of person who becomes an HOA president specifically so they can tell other people what to do. I turned and left without another word, the door slamming behind me harder than I intended. When I got home, I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop and started reading through the dense legal language. Marcus was right. The board did have broad authority to implement safety regulations, and while the snow removal requirement seemed excessive, it wasn't technically outside their power. What really annoyed me was that the bylaw also stated that any regulation changes had to be communicated to homeowners at least 60 days before taking effect. and I definitely hadn't received any notice 6 months ago. I spent the next hour digging through my email and going through the stack of mail I kept in a drawer in my office. Finally, buried under a pile of credit card offers and grocery store flyers, I found a newsletter dated 6 months prior. It was a glossy trifold brochure with articles about upcoming community events and reminders about landscaping requirements. On the very last page, in a small paragraph near the bottom, was a mention of updated safety protocols regarding winter weather preparedness. It didn't specifically mention roof snow removal. It didn't give any details about measurements or timelines. It was the vaguest possible reference to new rules, clearly designed to technically satisfy the notification requirement without actually informing anyone of anything useful. I took photos of the newsletter and started drafting an email to the HOA board, laying out my concerns about the lack of proper notification and the unreasonable nature of the requirement. I pointed out that hiring contractors during peak snow season was both expensive and difficult, that the requirement placed an undue burden on homeowners, and that the fines were excessive given the circumstances. I sent it off and tried to put the whole thing out of my mind. 2 days later, I received a response. It was from Karen, writing on behalf of the board, and it was exactly as helpful as I expected. She thanked me for my concerns, noted that they had been received and would be considered, and reminded me that my fines now totaled $400 and would continue to increase by $50 per day until I complied. I called 3 different contractors that afternoon. The first had a 3-week waiting list. The second quoted me $750 for the job. The third didn't even bother calling me back. The snow on my roof had settled somewhat since the storm, compressed by its own weight and the occasional sunny afternoon, but it was still well over the 12-inch threshold. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around me. I had always loved these sounds, the way old wood responds to temperature changes and wind. Now all I could think about was the absurdity of being fined for something that was completely normal for mountain living. The next morning, I woke up to find my truck buried under a fresh 6 inches of snow from an overnight dusting. As I cleared off the windshield, I noticed something interesting. The HOA office building, which sat at the base of a small slope, had a large parking lot directly adjacent to it. And between my property and that parking lot, there was a direct line of sight, separated only by about 100 yards of forest and the community access road. An idea started forming in my mind. It was petty, maybe even childish, but the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. I spent the rest of the morning researching Colorado property law and HOA regulations. What I found was interesting. While the HOA could fine me for not removing snow from my roof, there was nothing that required me to control where that snow went when it did eventually come down. Natural snow movement, whether from melting, sliding, or avalanche, was considered an act of nature. As long as I wasn't deliberately causing property damage or creating a hazard, I wasn't liable for where the snow ended up. I also discovered that my roof had been specifically designed with a steep pitch to encourage snow to slide off naturally. The original builder had even installed snow guards near the eaves to control the release, preventing sudden avalanches that might damage the foundation or landscaping directly below. However, those snow guards could be adjusted or removed if a homeowner wanted to encourage faster snow release. The wheels in my head started turning faster. I went outside and examined my roofline carefully. The back of my house faced downhill, toward the community road, and beyond that, the HOA office and its parking lot. If I removed the snow guards on that side of the house, and maybe used a roof rake to loosen the snow pack just a little, gravity and physics would do the rest. Eventually, all that accumulated snow would slide off in one massive sheet, tumble down the hillside, and end up right in the HOA parking lot. It was perfect. I wouldn't be violating any laws. I'd be removing the snow from my roof, which was exactly what they wanted. Sure, it might make a mess of their parking area, but that was just an unfortunate consequence of following their ridiculous rules. I spent the rest of that day and the next preparing. I carefully documented everything with photos and videos, showing the current state of my roof, the snow accumulation, and the natural slope of the land. I took screenshots of weather forecasts, showing that temperatures were expected to rise slightly over the next few days, which would naturally begin the melting process. I wanted a complete record to protect myself if Karen tried to claim I had done something wrong. On the third day, I climbed up a ladder to my roofline and carefully removed the snow guards on the back side of the house. They were held in place with brackets that unscrewed easily. I then used a long roof rake to gently disturb the base layer of the snow pack, breaking up the ice that had formed between the snow and the shingles. I didn't pull any snow down or force anything. I just loosened it enough that when it was ready to move, it would do so all at once rather than in small chunks. Then I waited. The weather cooperated beautifully. Temperatures climbed into the high 30s during the day, and the sun was bright and direct. I could hear creaking and groaning from my roof as the snow pack began to shift and settle. Meltwater started dripping from the eaves, creating long icicles that sparkled in the afternoon light. On the fourth day, I was working at my desk when I heard it. A deep, rumbling crack, like thunder rolling through the mountains. I jumped up and ran to my back window just in time to see the entire snow load from my roof release at once. It was spectacular. Tons of snow, compressed into dense layers of powder and ice, slid off in a single massive sheet. It hit the ground behind my house with a tremendous thud, then began tumbling down the hillside, gathering momentum as it went. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The avalanche of snow crashed through the trees, sending up plumes of white powder. It crossed the community road, which was thankfully empty at that moment, and continued down toward the HOA office. The parking lot sat in a natural depression, like a bowl, which meant the snow had nowhere to go but pile up. The snow wave hit the parking lot with the force of a small landslide. It covered the entire area, burying the 3 cars that were parked there under at least 4 or 5 feet of dense, packed snow. It filled every parking space, climbed up against the office building itself, and even partially blocked the entrance door. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that bubbles up when you've been pushed too far and finally push back. I saved the video and took several photos from different angles, then went back to my computer and drafted an email to the HOA. Dear HOA Board, I wrote, I am pleased to inform you that I have complied with Section 12.4, subsection B of the Community Guidelines. The snow has been successfully removed from my roof. Please find attached photographic evidence of my compliance. I trust this resolves the matter and that my fines will be rescinded. Best regards, Nathan Torres. I attached before and after photos showing my now clear roof, hit send, and sat back in my chair with a satisfied grin. It took less than 20 minutes for my phone to start ringing. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Torres, Karen's voice was shrill, almost screaming. What have you done? Do you have any idea what you've done? I removed the snow from my roof just like you demanded, I said calmly. My roof is completely clear now. You should be thanking me for being such a responsible homeowner. You buried the HOA parking lot. There are cars under all that snow. The entrance to the office is blocked. That's unfortunate. But the snow had to go somewhere, Karen. It's not my fault that gravity pulled it downhill. That's just physics. You did this deliberately. I did what you ordered me to do. I removed snow from my roof. Where the snow ends up when it falls naturally isn't something I can control. Maybe the HOA should have considered the geography and drainage patterns before implementing such a strict snow removal policy. There was sputtering on the other end of the line, and I could hear other voices in the background, people talking frantically. This isn't over, Mr. Torres. We will be taking action against you. What action would that be, Karen? I followed your rules. My roof is clear. That's what you wanted. She hung up without responding, and I sat there feeling more satisfied than I had in weeks. Over the next few hours, I watched from my window as people from the HOA office tried to deal with the snow situation. They called in a plow service, but the snow was too deep and too densely packed for a standard plow to handle. They tried shoveling, but there was simply too much of it. Eventually, they brought in a small excavator, the kind used for landscaping, and started slowly clearing the parking lot one scoop at a time. It took them 2 full days to clear everything. 2 days during which the HOA office was essentially inaccessible. Meetings had to be canceled, and Karen's car remained buried under several tons of snow and ice. I heard through Marcus that she had to rent a car just to get around, and that she was absolutely furious. I expected retaliation, and it came swiftly. A week after my roof avalanche, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. It accused me of deliberately causing property damage, creating a public hazard, and acting in a manner detrimental to the community. They were fining me $5,000 and threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay within 30 days. That was when I decided to fight back properly. I contacted a real estate attorney in Denver named Robert Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. I sent him all my documentation, the photos, the videos, the emails, the citations, everything. We had a video call 2 days later. Robert was in his early 40s, wearing glasses and a button-up shirt, sitting in an office with law books lining the walls behind him. He had reviewed everything I sent and was shaking his head with what looked like a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "This is one of the more creative HOA disputes I've seen," he said. "Let me make sure I understand. They fined you for not removing snow from your roof. You removed it, and now they're fining you for where the snow ended up. That's about the size of it. And you have documentation showing that the snow fell naturally, that you didn't use machinery or explosives or anything to deliberately direct it toward the HOA property. Correct. I removed the snow guards, which is allowed under my property rights, and I loosened the base layer to facilitate natural sliding, but I didn't force anything. Physics did the rest." Robert leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his face. "Mr. Torres, I think we have a very strong case here. In fact, I think we have grounds for a countersuit. The HOA's snow removal policy, as implemented, appears to violate several principles of reasonableness and prior notice. Additionally, their attempt to fine you for something that amounts to an act of nature is legally dubious at best. What do you recommend? First, we file a formal response to their demand letter, denying all liability and outlining our position. Second, we demand that the HOA board schedule a special meeting to address this issue, which they're required to do under Colorado law if a homeowner requests it. Third, we put them on notice that if they continue this course of action, will file suit for harassment and improper enforcement of HOA regulations. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $3,000, which will cover the initial work. If this goes to actual litigation, costs will increase, but honestly, I don't think it will get that far. HOAs hate bad publicity, and this is the kind of story that the local news would love. A power-hungry HOA president bullying homeowners over snow removal. It writes itself. I agreed to his terms and wired the retainer that afternoon. Robert was true to his word. Within 3 days, he had drafted a comprehensive response letter that laid out the legal deficiencies in the HOA's position and demanded a special board meeting to address the dispute. He also included a not-so-subtle hint that we were prepared to go to the media if the HOA didn't back down. The special meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later, held in the community center on a Tuesday evening. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the room already filling up with people. Apparently, word had spread through the neighborhood about the dispute, and a lot of other homeowners were interested in the outcome. Many of them had also received citations for snow removal violations. Marcus was there, along with at least 30 other residents. The room had that buzzing energy of a crowd that's been waiting for an opportunity to voice their complaints. Karen sat at the front table with 3 other board members, looking considerably less confident than she had in her office weeks before. The meeting started with standard procedural business, but everyone was impatient to get to the main event. When Karen finally called for discussion of the Torres matter, the room went quiet. Robert stood up, looking professional and composed. Good evening. I'm Robert Chen, representing Mr. Torres in this matter. I appreciate the board taking the time to hold this special meeting. Let me begin by outlining the serious concerns we have with how this situation has been handled. He went through everything methodically. The inadequate notice of the new snow removal policy, the unreasonable nature of the requirement, the excessive fines, and the absurd attempt to hold me liable for where snow naturally fell from my property. He cited specific sections of Colorado HOA law, pointed out inconsistencies in how the board had interpreted its own bylaws, and made it crystal clear that the HOA was on very shaky legal ground. Furthermore, Robert continued, we have documented evidence that other homeowners in this community have snow accumulation on their roofs equal to or exceeding what Mr. Torres had, yet they have not received citations. This suggests selective enforcement, which is another violation of HOA regulations and Colorado law. Several people in the audience nodded, and I heard mutters of agreement. Karen tried to maintain control. Mr. Chen, the board has the authority to enforce safety regulations as we see fit. Mr. Torres's actions were deliberate and caused significant damage and disruption. What damage? Robert asked. Please be specific. Was any property destroyed? Were any vehicles damaged beyond some snow that could be removed? Was anyone injured? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. One of the other board members, an older man named Gerald, leaned forward. The snow blocked access to the office building. That's a disruption of HOA operations. Temporarily, Robert said, and that disruption was a natural consequence of following the board's own policy. You can't demand that homeowners remove roof snow and then complain about where that snow ends up when it falls. It's logically inconsistent and legally indefensible. The meeting devolved from there. Other homeowners started standing up and voicing their own complaints about the snow removal policy. A woman named Patricia talked about how she had paid $800 to have her roof cleared, only to have the contractor damage her shingles in the process. Another man, Frank, pointed out that he had a hip replacement last year and couldn't physically climb a ladder to remove snow guards or check his roof. Yet he was being threatened with fines. Karen tried to maintain order, but it was clear she had lost the room. The other board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, Gerald called for a recess so the board could deliberate privately. They came back 20 minutes later looking defeated. Karen read from a prepared statement, her voice tight. After careful consideration, the board has decided to suspend enforcement of Section 12.4, subsection B pending further review. All fines issued under this policy will be rescinded. Mr. Torres, your account will be credited, and we apologize for any inconvenience. The room erupted in applause. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mixed with vindication. Robert shook my hand and leaned in to whisper, "That's a complete surrender. Congratulations." But Karen wasn't done. As people started filing out of the room, she stood up and pointed directly at me. "This isn't over, Mr. Torres. You may have won this battle, but I will not tolerate homeowners who deliberately undermine this community." "Karen," I said loudly enough that people stopped to listen, "all I did was follow your rules. If you don't like the results, maybe you should write better rules. Or better yet, maybe you should stop trying to micromanage everyone's lives and let people live in peace." Her face turned red, and for a moment I thought she might actually explode. Instead, she grabbed her papers, stuffed them into a briefcase, and stormed out of the community center. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. My account was credited the following week. I received a formal letter acknowledging that all fines had been rescinded, and life went back to normal. The snow began to melt as winter turned toward spring, and I focused on my work and enjoying my home. But Karen Pritchard was not the type of person who let things go. In April, I received a notice that my garbage bins had been left out past the allowed time on collection day, and that I was being fined $50. The thing was, I had brought my bins in at exactly the same time I always did, within an hour of collection. I took time-stamped photos from my doorbell camera showing when I had rolled the bins back to my house. The fine was rescinded after I submitted evidence, but it was clearly harassment. In May, I got cited for having grass that exceeded the allowed height by 1 inch. I measured it myself. It was exactly 3 inches tall, which was within the permitted range, but Karen claimed her measurement showed 3.2 inches. Again, I fought it, and again it was rescinded. In June, the citations got more creative. I was accused of having a non-approved mailbox design, even though my mailbox had been there since before I bought the house and had been approved by previous boards. I was cited for parking my truck in my driveway overnight, which allegedly violated a commercial vehicle restriction, even though my truck was a standard personal pickup. Each time, I had to gather evidence, file appeals, and waste hours of my time dealing with Karen's petty revenge. Other homeowners were experiencing similar harassment, especially those who had spoken up at the special meeting. Marcus told me he had received 4 different citations in 2 months, all of them frivolous. Patricia, the woman who had complained about roof damage, was threatened with fines for having outdoor decorations that allegedly didn't meet community standards, even though they were simple flower pots. By July, people had had enough. A group of about 15 homeowners, myself included, filed a formal complaint against Karen Pritchard with the HOA board, alleging harassment, abuse of authority, and selective enforcement of regulations. We requested that she be removed from her position as president. The board scheduled another meeting to address the complaint. This one was even more packed than the last, with probably 50 people crammed into the community center. The tension in the room was palpable. Karen stood at the front, looking defiant. "These allegations are completely unfounded," she said. "I have done nothing but try to maintain community standards and protect property values. If some homeowners don't appreciate that, perhaps they should consider living somewhere without an HOA." "Karen," Gerald said, looking tired, "we've reviewed the citations you've issued over the past 4 months. There are over 60 of them, and nearly all have been appealed and rescinded. This is clearly a pattern. A pattern of enforcing rules that people want to ignore," Karen shot back. "No," said another board member, a woman named Susan. "It's a pattern of harassment. You've been targeting specific homeowners who disagreed with you. That's not acceptable." The meeting went on for over 2 hours. Homeowners stood up and shared their stories of dealing with Karen's citations, her rude behavior, and her refusal to listen to reasonable concerns. Some people got emotional, talking about the stress and anxiety of constantly worrying about being fined for arbitrary violations. Finally, Gerald called for a vote. The motion was to remove Karen Pritchard as president and replace her with Susan on an interim basis until the next scheduled election. The vote was 3 in favor, 1 against. Karen herself was the only dissenting vote. She stood up, face flushed, and looked around the room with barely controlled rage. "This is a witch hunt. You're all going to regret this. This community will fall apart without proper leadership." "I think we'll be just fine," Gerald said quietly. "Karen, please turn over all HOA documents and records to Susan by the end of the week." Karen didn't say another word. She grabbed her things and left, slamming the door hard enough that it rattled the windows. For a few weeks, things were peaceful. Susan took over as president and immediately announced a comprehensive review of all HOA policies. She formed committees to examine which regulations were necessary and which were overly burdensome. The arbitrary citations stopped. People started to relax. I should have known it wouldn't last. In late August, I was coming home from a grocery run when I noticed something odd. There was a moving truck parked at the end of my driveway, partially blocking the entrance. I pulled up behind it and got out, confused. I hadn't ordered anything, and I wasn't expecting any deliveries. A man in a work uniform approached me. "You Nathan Torres?" "Yeah, what's this about? We've got a delivery for you. 3 pallets of landscaping rock. Where do you want them?" "I didn't order any landscaping rock." The man frowned and checked his clipboard. "Says here Nathan Torres, this address. Order was placed 2 weeks ago, already paid for." I pulled out my phone and had him send me the order details. Sure enough, it showed my name and address, but I had never placed the order. The payment had been made with a credit card I didn't recognize. "This is fraud," I said. "Someone placed this order pretending to be me. I'm not accepting this delivery." The delivery man shrugged. "Not my problem, I just drive the truck. You'll have to sort it out with the company." He gave me the contact information for the landscaping supply company, and I spent the next hour on the phone trying to explain the situation. Eventually, they agreed to take back the rock and investigate the fraudulent order, but it was a hassle I didn't need. 2 days later, I found my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had taken a baseball bat or something similar to it, denting it badly and knocking it off its post. I filed a police report, and the officer who responded suggested I install security cameras if I didn't already have them. I already had a doorbell camera, but I added 2 more cameras covering the sides and back of my house. They were connected to cloud storage and would alert me to any motion. A week later, the cameras paid off. At 2 in the morning, I woke up to an alert on my phone. I opened the app and saw a figure dressed in dark clothes approaching my truck, which was parked in my driveway. The person was carrying something, and as I watched, they bent down near my rear tire. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and called 911 while pulling on shoes. By the time I got outside, the person was gone, but they had left behind their handiwork. All 4 of my tires had been slashed. The police arrived within 10 minutes. I showed them the camera footage, but the person's face wasn't clearly visible. They were wearing a hood and had kept their head down, avoiding the camera angles. "Looks like you've got someone targeting you," the officer said, a woman named Officer Daniels. "Any idea who might have a grudge?" I hesitated, then explained the entire situation with the HOA, Karen's removal as president, and the harassment that had followed. Officer Daniels took notes and said she'd look into it, but without a clear shot of the person's face, there wasn't much they could do immediately. The tires cost me $800 to replace. I was furious, but I also knew that whoever was doing this wanted me to react, wanted me to do something stupid. So I didn't. I documented everything, kept copies of all police reports, and installed even more cameras. Marcus called me a few days later. "Hey man, you need to see this." He sent me a link to a Facebook page called Mountain Ridge Community Watch. It had been created recently, and it was filled with posts about how certain homeowners were ruining the neighborhood. My name was mentioned specifically, along with photos of my house, and claims that I was engaged in criminal behavior, harassing the HOA and bringing down property values. The page administrator was listed as concerned resident, but the writing style and the specific details made it obvious who was behind it. Karen Pritchard was waging a public campaign against me. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to Robert Chen. He reviewed the posts and called me back within an hour. "This is defamation," he said bluntly. "These posts make specific false claims about criminal behavior. That's textbook libel. We can absolutely sue over this." "I want to," I said. "But I also want to know if we can prove it's actually her running the page. We can subpoena Facebook for the account information. If the page was created from her IP address or computer, we'll have our proof. But Nathan, I need to ask you something. Is all of this worth it? Litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Sometimes it's better to walk away." I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to just let it go, sell my house and move somewhere without an HOA. But another part of me, the part that was tired of being pushed around by petty tyrants who thought they could get away with anything, wanted to fight. "It's worth it," I said. "Not just for me, but for everyone else in this neighborhood who's been dealing with her garbage. She needs to face consequences. All right then, let's go after her." Robert filed a lawsuit against Karen Pritchard in early September, citing defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We included all the documentation I had gathered, the screenshots from the Facebook page, the police reports about the vandalism, and everything else. Karen was served with the lawsuit at her home. According to Marcus, who heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine, she had been absolutely livid, screaming at the process server and claiming it was all a conspiracy against her. Her response came 2 weeks later through her attorney, a guy named Mitchell Bradford, who had a reputation for being aggressive. He denied all allegations and filed a countersuit claiming that I had harassed Karen, damaged HOA property with the roof avalanche, and engaged in a campaign to defame her and damage her reputation. It was absurd, but it meant the case was going forward. We entered the discovery phase, where both sides request documents and evidence from each other. Robert subpoenaed Facebook for the account information on the Community Watch page. We also subpoenaed the HOA's records, showing the pattern of citations and Karen's correspondence. What we found was even better than I had hoped. The Facebook page had been created from an IP address registered to Karen's home. The landscaping rock delivery had been ordered using a prepaid credit card that had been purchased at a store near Karen's house, and surveillance footage from that store showed Karen making the purchase. The evidence was damning. But the real bombshell came when Robert received the HOA's financial records as part of the discovery process. He called me late one evening, his voice excited. "Nathan, you need to sit down for this. I've been going through the HOA's finances, and there are some major discrepancies." Karen was writing checks to vendors that don't exist. Over the past year, she's embezzled approximately $40,000 from the HOA. I felt my jaw drop. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious." She created fake invoices for services that were never performed, wrote checks to made-up companies, and deposited the money into accounts she controlled. This isn't just civil liability anymore. This is criminal fraud. What do? We report it to the police and the district attorney's office. This is way beyond HOA drama now. Karen Pritchard is going to face criminal charges. Robert contacted the Routt County District Attorney's office the next day and provided them with all the financial evidence. The DA's office opened an investigation, and within a week, detectives were interviewing board members and examining the HOA's bank records. The community was in an uproar when word got out. People were shocked that Karen had not only been a petty tyrant, but also a thief. The Facebook groups and neighborhood chat forums were filled with speculation and anger. In October, Karen Pritchard was arrested at her home and charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The local news covered it, with reporters standing outside the Routt County courthouse, describing how an HOA president had allegedly stolen thousands of dollars from her own community. I watched the news coverage from my living room, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I hadn't wanted any of this. I had just wanted to live in my house in peace, enjoy the mountains, and do my job. But Karen had made that impossible with her need to control everyone around her. The criminal case moved forward quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, and Karen's attorney advised her to take a plea deal. In November, she pleaded guilty to felony theft and fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 5 years of probation, and ordered to repay the $40,000 she had stolen, plus restitution for the legal costs incurred by the HOA. As for our civil lawsuit, Karen's attorney approached Robert about settling. With the criminal conviction on record, fighting the defamation and harassment claims was pointless. We settled for $75,000, which Karen would have to pay through a structured payment plan, since she clearly didn't have that kind of money readily available. The HOA held a special election in December to completely replace the board. Susan remained as president, but new members were elected with a mandate to reform the organization and prevent anything like this from happening again. One of their first actions was to eliminate dozens of overly restrictive regulations, including any mention of snow removal requirements. Marcus ended up joining the board as treasurer, with a focus on financial transparency. He implemented new systems for tracking expenses and required multiple approvals for any expenditure over $1,000. I finally felt like I could breathe again. My house was peaceful, my truck was intact, and there were no more threatening letters or frivolous citations. The snow began falling again in December, accumulating on my roof just like it always did, and nobody said a word about it. On Christmas Eve, I was sitting in my living room with a fire crackling in the fireplace and a glass of whiskey in my hand. Outside, fresh snow was falling, blanketing everything in white. My roof was collecting its winter load, probably a good foot already, and it would be there until spring when it would naturally melt away. Marcus came over that evening with his wife, Jennifer, and we had dinner together. We talked about everything except HOAs and Karen Pritchard. We talked about skiing conditions, upcoming concerts in Denver, plans for the new year. Normal things. Pleasant things. As they were leaving, Marcus paused at the door. "You know, man, I've been thinking. What you did with that roof snow, that was brilliant. Petty as hell, but brilliant." I laughed. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I didn't expect it to snowball into all of this. Bad pun. I know. He shook his head, grinning. But seriously, thanks for fighting back. A lot of people were fed up with her, but nobody wanted to be the one to stand up and take the heat. You did, and it made a difference. After they left, I stood on my porch looking out at the mountains. The community was quiet, lights twinkling from houses scattered across the hillside. Somewhere down below, the HOA office sat dark and empty, waiting for the next business day. But it was different now. The organization had been reformed, the tyrant had been removed, and people could go back to just living their lives. I went back inside, added another log to the fire, and settled in for the night. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere above me, my roof was collecting it all, just like roofs do in the mountains. And this time, nobody cared. Nobody was going to find me, harass me, or try to make my life miserable over something so natural and normal. The whole ordeal had taught me something important about standing up to bullies, even when they hide behind official positions and printed regulations. Sometimes the system protects them, and sometimes you have to work within that system to expose them for what they really are. It had been exhausting, expensive, and stressful, but in the end, it had been worth it. Karen Pritchard reported to the Routt County Jail in early January to begin serving her sentence. I didn't take any joy in seeing her go to prison. I wasn't that vindictive. But I did feel satisfied knowing that justice had been served, that someone who had abused their authority and stolen from their community was being held accountable. The settlement money from the lawsuit went into a savings account. I thought about using it to upgrade my house or take a vacation, but I decided to keep most of it as an emergency fund. The whole experience had reminded me how quickly life can become complicated and expensive. By February, life had fully returned to normal. I was working on a new software project for a client in California, attending virtual meetings, and writing code in my home office while snow fell outside. The HOA newsletter, now published by Susan's Reformed Board, featured articles about upcoming community events and reminders about standard maintenance issues. It was boring and practical, exactly what an HOA newsletter should be. I ran into Susan at the grocery store one afternoon. She was loading bags into her car when she saw me and waved me over. "Nathan, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did," she said. "I know it cost you a lot, both financially and personally, but the community is better for it." "Just glad it's over," I said. "We all are. And I promise you, the board is committed to being reasonable and working with homeowners, not against them. No more ridiculous rules about snow removal or any of that nonsense." "I appreciate that. How are things going with the financial recovery?" "Slowly but surely. We're working with the insurance company on some of it, and Karen is making her restitution payments. We'll get there." We chatted for a few more minutes about mundane things before going our separate ways. It was exactly the kind of interaction that should be normal in a community, friendly and casual, without underlying tension or fear of arbitrary punishment. That evening, I got an email from Robert Chen. The subject line read, "Case closed." Inside was a brief message saying that all legal matters had been finalized, Karen's appeals had been denied, and there were no remaining issues. He thanked me for being a good client and said to reach out if I ever needed anything in the future. I replied with my own thanks, then archived the email. I didn't want to delete it because it represented the end of a difficult chapter, but I also didn't need to keep it front and center. It was time to move forward. Spring came early that year. By late March, the snow on my roof had melted naturally, running off through the gutters and downspouts exactly as designed. The hillside behind my house turned green as wildflowers began to bloom. I spent more time outside, hiking the trails near my house and enjoying the fresh mountain air. The HOA held a community barbecue in April, the first one since Karen had been removed. Nearly everyone in the neighborhood showed up. There were grills smoking with burgers and hot dogs, kids running around playing games, and people actually enjoying themselves. It felt like a real community for the first time since I had moved in. I was manning one of the grills when Patricia came up to me with a plate. "I heard you're the one who convinced the board to get rid of that ridiculous snow policy," she said. "My roof is still recovering from that contractor they made me hire." "Sorry to hear that," I said, flipping a burger. "But yeah, I had a hand in it." "Well, thank you. And thank you for standing up to Karen. She was making everyone miserable." More people came up throughout the afternoon with similar sentiments. I hadn't realized how many residents had been affected by Karen's regime until they started sharing their stories. Some had been too intimidated to fight back. Others had just paid the fines and kept quiet, not wanting to rock the boat. The relief was palpable now that she was gone. As the sun set and people started heading home, Marcus came over and handed me a beer. "Good turnout today." "Yeah, it was nice." "You know, when you first moved here, I told my wife that you seemed like a quiet guy who'd keep to himself. I never expected you'd end up being the person who took down the HOA president." I laughed. "Neither did I. I just wanted her to leave me alone." Sometimes that's how it starts. One person saying enough is enough, and suddenly everyone else finds their courage. We stood there watching the last families pack up their things and say goodbye. The community center lights came on automatically as darkness fell, casting a warm glow over the parking lot where Karen's car had once been buried under snow. "Think she learned anything from all this?" Marcus asked. "Probably not. People like that rarely do. They always think they're the victim, that everyone else is wrong." Her loss then. We finished our beers in comfortable silence, then helped break down the grills and clean up. By the time I got home, it was fully dark and the stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights. I stood in my driveway for a few minutes, just looking up and appreciating the view. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously, half expecting some new form of harassment. Instead, it was a simple message. "Thank you for everything you did. You made this neighborhood livable again. From a grateful neighbor." I didn't respond, just saved the message and went inside. It was nice to know that the fight had been worth it, that other people had benefited from my stubborn refusal to back down. The months passed quietly after that. Summer brought tourists to Steamboat Springs, clogging the roads and filling the restaurants, but my neighborhood remained relatively peaceful. I worked on my projects, took long bike rides on mountain trails, and occasionally met up with Marcus and other neighbors for dinner or drinks. The HOA continued operating smoothly under Susan's leadership. They held regular meetings with actual community input, made reasonable decisions about maintenance and improvements, and generally stayed out of people's way unless there was a real issue that needed addressing. It was everything an HOA should be and so rarely is. In September, I got an email notification about a local news article. The headline read, "Former HOA President Completes Jail Sentence, Begins Probation." I clicked on it and read about how Karen had been released from the county jail after serving her time and was now on probation with strict conditions. She had moved out of the Mountain Ridge community and was living somewhere in Denver, working at an administrative job to make her restitution payments. The article quoted the DA's office as saying it was a reminder that people in positions of authority, even small ones like HOA boards, must be held accountable for abuse of power and theft. It mentioned my case briefly, noting that the investigation into her theft had begun after civil litigation revealed financial irregularities. I felt a small sense of closure reading it. The system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. Karen had faced consequences for her actions. The money was being repaid, and the community had moved on. That winter brought heavy snowfall again, some of the best skiing conditions in years. My roof accumulated snow just like always, and just like always, I let it sit there until it naturally melted in the spring. No citations, no fines, no drama. Just winter in the mountains. One afternoon in December, I was working at my desk when I heard a vehicle pull up outside. I glanced out the window and saw an SUV I didn't recognize. A woman got out, someone I had never seen before, and walked up to my door. I answered her knock to find a well-dressed woman in her 30s holding a folder. "Nathan Torres. That's me. My name is Amanda Reeves. I'm a journalist with Colorado Monthly magazine. I'm working on a story about HOA overreach and accountability, and your case came up in my research. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk to me about what happened." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave it all in the past. But another part thought that maybe sharing the story more publicly could help other people dealing with similar situations. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. We sat in my living room, and I told her the whole story from start to finish. She took notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. When I got to the part about the roof avalanche, she actually laughed. "That's brilliant," she said. "Petty but brilliant." "I've heard that before," I said with a smile. The interview lasted about an hour. Amanda asked about the legal process, the costs involved, and what advice I would give to other homeowners facing similar situations. I told her the truth, that fighting back was expensive and stressful, but that sometimes it was necessary if you wanted to maintain your dignity and quality of life. "Too many people just accept that HOAs have unlimited power," I said. "But they don't. They're bound by laws and their own bylaws, and if they overstep, they can be held accountable. It's just that most people don't know that or don't want to go through the hassle of fighting. And when they steal from the community on top of it, then it becomes even more important to fight. Karen could have kept being a petty tyrant forever if we hadn't discovered the embezzlement. That's what finally brought her down." Amanda published her article in the January issue of Colorado Monthly. It was a comprehensive piece about HOA power dynamics, featuring my story prominently alongside several other cases from around the state. The article got picked up by some other publications and even made it to a few national news websites. I received dozens of emails and messages from people around the country who had dealt with similar HOA issues. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to share their own horror stories. I tried to respond to as many as I could, always with the same message. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to push back when the HOA oversteps. The attention died down after a few weeks, and life returned to its comfortable routine. My house remained my sanctuary, the place where I could work and relax without worrying about arbitrary rules or vindictive board members. The snow on my roof served as a reminder of how absurd the whole thing had been, and how satisfying it was to have stood my ground. Years from now, I imagine I'll look back on this whole experience with a mixture of frustration and amusement. The frustration at having had to deal with it in the first place, and the amusement at how creative revenge combined with legitimate legal action can sometimes produce justice. But for now, as I sit here in my home office watching fresh snow fall outside, I'm just grateful for the peace and quiet. No citations on my door, no threatening letters in my mailbox, no hostile board members trying to make my life miserable. Just the simple pleasure of living in a beautiful place, doing work I enjoy, and being part of a community that finally learned to respect its residents. The roof above me creaks slightly under the weight of accumulating snow, a sound that used to make me anxious but now just makes me smile. Let it snow. Let it pile up as high as it wants. When spring comes, it will melt on its own time, flowing harmlessly away through the natural drainage. That's how it's supposed to work, and no power-hungry HOA president is going to tell me otherwise ever again. Marcus stopped by one evening in late January with a bottle of bourbon and some news. We sat in my living room with drinks in hand as he told me about the HOA's annual meeting, which had just taken place. "We had the best turnout ever," he said. "Over half the homeowners in the community showed up." And you know what the main topic was? What? How to prevent another Karen situation. We amended the bylaws to add more oversight on the board, term limits for officers, and requirements for financial audits by outside firms. Your case basically became the template for how not to run an HOA. "Glad something good came from all that mess," I said. "More than that, man. You changed the whole culture here. People aren't afraid anymore. They speak up at meetings, they question decisions, they hold the board accountable. It's what it should have been all along." We toasted to that, and spent the rest of the evening talking about everything except HOAs. It felt good to have a friend who had been there through the worst of it, and could now share in the quiet satisfaction of how it all turned out. As winter deepened and the days grew shorter, I found myself appreciating my home more than ever. Not just the physical structure or the beautiful location, but what it represented. It was a place I had fought for, defended against petty bureaucratic tyranny, and ultimately kept on my own terms. The snow continued to fall throughout February, and my roof continued to collect it, just as physics and architecture intended. Down the hill, the HOA office operated under new management with new principles, serving the community rather than ruling it. And somewhere in Denver, Karen Pritchard was making restitution payments and serving her probation, hopefully learning something from the consequences of her actions, though I had my doubts. On the first warm day of March, when the sun was bright and temperatures climbed into the 50s, I stood outside and watched as the snow on my roof finally began its slow melt. Water dripped from the eaves, creating small streams that ran down to the drainage systems. No avalanche this time, just a natural, gentle thaw that would continue for weeks until the roof was bare again. It was exactly as it should be. No drama, no conflict, no vindictive board members trying to impose their will on everyone around them. Just a house in the mountains, shedding its winter coat as spring approached, while the person who lived there enjoyed the view and looked forward to whatever came next. And that, ultimately, was the best revenge of all. Not the legal victories or the satisfaction of seeing Karen face consequences, but simply living well and peacefully in the home I had chosen, on my own terms, without anyone trying to control how I did it. The story of the Great Roof Avalanche would probably be told and retold in the neighborhood for years, growing more embellished with each telling. But the truth was simple enough. A homeowner got tired of being bullied, found a creative way to comply with an unreasonable rule, and when the bully pushed back too hard, stood his ground until justice was served. Sometimes standing up for yourself leads to more trouble than it's worth. But sometimes it leads to positive change that benefits everyone. My situation had been the latter, and I was proud of that. Not proud in a boastful way, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had done the right thing even when it was difficult and expensive. As spring fully arrived and the last patches of snow disappeared from my roof and yard, I found myself looking forward to summer. There would be hiking and biking, barbecues and community events, work projects and lazy afternoons reading on my deck. All the normal things that make life worth living, uninterrupted by petty tyranny or legal battles. The Mountain Ridge community had learned its lesson. I had learned mine, and Karen Pritchard had learned hers the hardest way possible. Now we could all move forward, hopefully wiser and more committed to treating each other with basic respect and common sense. And if another heavy snow fell next winter and accumulated on my roof, I would smile and let it sit there as long as it wanted, secure in the knowledge that nobody was going to find me, harass me, or make my life difficult over something so natural and inevitable. That peace of mind alone was worth everything I had gone through to get it.